This is the E-Commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I have another stellar guest lined up for you today. I would love to welcome Axel BUKOWSKI from Madden Analytics. Welcome, Axel.
Thank you so much. I'm super glad and honored to be here, and super nice to meet you, Jason.
Yeah, super cool to meet you. I think I've had a few conversations with some other folks on your team as your team members were trying to organize our schedules and link us up and get an overlapping date and time where we would both be available for this conversation, because you're based in Stockholm, Sweden, right?
I'm based in Stockholm, and the whole team is based in Stockholm, and I'm also born and raised in Stockholm, so it's very familiar. But you're somewhere in Mexico, right?
Correct. I'm in Puebla City, which is about 2 hours southeast of Mexico City. And so I grew up in Southern California, lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, and have been living in Mexico for the last year and a half with my wife and dog.
Sounds amazing. And the biggest perk is the weather, right? Now in Stockholm, 2 or 3 days ago, we went from quite a warm fall so far, or autumn so far, but then just suddenly from one day to another, it dropped, like the temperature dropped like 10, 15 degrees Celsius, and now it's just above zero. And it's just freezing cold. You wake up in the morning and you go to work and you forget that it's getting colder. So you use your summer coat, and then it's just too cold. And now it's going to be like this or even colder for 5-6 months. So you have a much nicer time in Mexico, I assume.
Yeah, definitely. After spending almost 30 years in New Zealand, I definitely know what cold, wet, rainy weather is. And certainly the weather was a big attraction for us here. We're at 2,000 meters of elevation, so we don't get the humidity that the coasts do. And it's very temperate climate year-round, ranges from anywhere from about 15 to 35 degrees C here in Puebla. So that's livable for most people.
Sounds amazing. If I didn't have 3 small kids, then perhaps it could be an option for me as well. But I guess I'll have to wait until they've moved out. Then maybe Mexico is an option.
Maybe you can move Madden to Mexico. Let's talk about that. But anyways, speaking of Madden, before we get into what Madden is and does, and in all transparency, I've never worked with Madden, the platform, before. So I just have to go with what's on the tin and on the website. But before we get into this, what drew you into this space? You're working in the e-commerce logistics and demand planning and inventory planning space, but what attracted you to the e-commerce digital omnichannel space in the first place? Like, what was the big attraction there for you?
Sure. The whole team has different previous background from the consumer goods industry. So we all had different sort of views on this topic before starting or joining Madden. My background is that I studied economics at university here in Stockholm, and I worked as a management consultant for a few years, and I worked a lot within consumer goods, not necessarily with demand planning, but other types of topics. Left the consulting industry, and then I joined, was 2 different large e-commerce players in Europe or in Sweden. So the first one was Rocket Internet. It was a super active, infamous. Did that for 1 year. Then I joined another big Swedish company or Nordic company called CDON Group that had a lot of different portfolio e-com companies. And I did business development for them, for all portfolio companies. Super interesting. Worked a lot in different marketing projects, logistics, reporting, business intelligence, a lot of different projects and tasks. Left that to start my own company, and this probably 10 years ago. And then I started a company called Nividas Eyewear. You haven't heard of it because we were almost only selling in Sweden or the Nordics. But from a business perspective, a very similar type of business as Warby Parker in the US. Basically trying to compete with the big optician chains. I guess the optician industry is the same in most countries. It's a few really large players that manufacture both the frames and the lenses, and then you have these really large retail chains that sell the frames, the spectacles to the customers. Sometimes the producer of the frames and the lenses are also owners of the business as well, or the retail concept as well. So I ran that company, Nividas Eyewear, for 6 or 7 years, and inventory planning was just a big hassle for me and for us, for the team working with quantifying production volumes. And eyewear is actually, there's one factor sort of making eyewear stand out when it comes to production, because the lead times are often really long. In fashion, for example, we work a lot with fashion now with Madden. The usual or the standard lead times are around maybe 3 to 4 months. That's usually what the frame manufacturers claim within eyewear as well, that it's 110 days of manufacturing time. But in reality, it could take up to 6 months from order to actual delivery. It was a huge problem to actually to quantify how much to order at each and every or any given moment. And that was, when I think about that business concept, I think if we would have had a better way to actually quantify the production volumes, but also if we had a way to actually shorten the lead times, then I think the business model would have been much, much better. But it was a super interesting period of time. I loved working with that company. I left the CEO role there around 4 or 5 years ago, and decided to start Madden instead, together with a few now colleagues, but then at that time acquaintances. And they also came from different angles of the consumer goods industry. So we teamed up to provide a better sort of sales forecasting, production planning tool for, I would say, up to medium-sized companies. There are some other like competing tools around, but they're usually built for these very large enterprise companies, and they cost a fortune just to implement, and then they cost a fortune to run and maintain. So we've done it in more of a modern SaaS way, basically.
Wow, amazing. And look, I think your story resonates with me because I hear these things over and over again where somebody is almost scratching an itch. They have a challenge within their own business. They maybe develop an internal tool or a platform or a technology or a spreadsheet or whatever it might be to help run their business and help make it more efficient. And then they say, look, I can't be the only retailer or the only brand having this issue. Maybe I should look out there and identify others like me that are having a similar issue, and then spin this off, commercialize it, and then turn something that was a cost center into a profit center and spin it off as a product in its own right. And this goes all the way back to Amazon and them perfecting the model of turning cost centers into profit centers and spinning those off as their own unique businesses. Famously, AWS came about because of the infrastructure needed to run Amazon.com. So the reality is this is a well-trodden path for a lot of entrepreneurs scratching an itch, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that has definitely been a good thing for me and for us, coming from having seen the problem with my own eyes and having scratched my head over doing these kinds of processes. And as you said, when I spoke around with other friends or other people in the business or in similar industries, basically everyone was saying that this is a huge problem. We've built our own huge Excel model. It works to 70-80%, but it's not perfect. It takes a lot of time, super manual, etc. I definitely, like from my perspective, I could definitely see the need. And it's a good thing when we now, since a few years back, we're out on the market selling the tool, etc. It's quite good, I think, to be able to speak to the customers in their own way. I've done exactly what they're doing now in a manual way. I've done it myself, and now we can offer what we believe is a much better solution for it.
Yeah, and I think you speak to a scenario where the very large brands, they oftentimes have enterprise grade ERPs that maybe have demand planning, inventory planning modules built into them. They take into account lead time, supplier performance, transport, logistics, weather. They take into account 100 different variables when they're doing sort of demand and inventory planning. Because I think demand and inventory planning are joined at the hip, right? We can't do inventory planning without also doing demand planning. And we can't do demand planning until we understand sales velocity and demand down at the SKU level and acceleration and throughputs and all the bombs and the components and just everything. There's a lot to this whole demand/inventory planning game. There's so many inputs that sometimes when brands try to go it alone, they end up with an Excel spreadsheet with 1,000 macros in it, trying to accurately account for all of the inputs that try to get them to that perfect balance between having enough inventory to sell, but not having a whole bunch of inventory sitting on the shelves that has flooring costs associated with it and has stocking costs and ties up cash and just restricts your ability to be adaptable as a business to changing market conditions and changing, even especially in something like eyewear or fashion. Things come in and out of fashion really fast. We have seasonality at play. We have contract manufacturers that have massive lead times in their own right. We have going from a tech pack that usually comes out of a PLM system. Then we've got that data that has to get into the contract manufacturer's hands, and then you got to get sampling. There's a million things going on that most of your average consumers in the marketplace, they have no idea the amount of effort that goes on to get a product from concept into their hands.
Yeah, definitely. And just speaking to you mentioned large companies, they have often structured processes. Sometimes they don't have structured processes as well. But the larger the company, the more people at least you can have working on a subject or a topic. If you're Nike, then you can have thousands of persons working in demand planning and production planning. If you're a sort of small to medium-sized company, there's often like one person running the quantifications and the production volumes, meaning that she or he is owning the big Excel model and responsible for it to actually work. And it's just so easy that something gets corrupt in the file, or a formula that breaks, or some input data that is not correct, etc. And I also think on that topic, I think one of the main reasons why we exist as a company, and also one of the big reasons as to why I could start my previous company, the D2C eyewear brand, is that the emergence of D2C brands and D2C as a concept. Because, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago, if you were a product brand, then for sure you would have, now I'm generalizing a bit, but I think a majority of your sales would be through wholesale, right? Perhaps you had some stores, like brand stores, and obviously some brands were super focused on their own store chains. But for most brands, they were selling in wholesale, meaning that you sell your collection like 9 months before it's actually going to be delivered. Demand planning, inventory planning was much easier back then. Again, I'm generalizing, but you could basically just sum up all the pre-orders that you got from all your wholesale accounts. And then you summarize those numbers. Perhaps you put 20% extra on top just to be able to deliver in season as well. So you would have to risk maybe 20% of your production volumes. But then came D2C, which is a fantastic sales channel. Now you can sell stuff from Sweden to Mexico or whatever just through your cost-efficient Shopify website. But that also means that if wholesale is not the bulk of your business, then you have to speculate on your inventory, right? So everything you produce, everything you order is speculation. If you're 100% D2C, then 100% of your inventory is basically speculation. And this is fantastic in one way, but it's also problematic in another way, because that means you just have to spend a lot more time, effort, be much more detailed in how you actually try to forecast and plan your demand and inventory.
Yeah, and even in the B2B world where you have wholesale accounts, or if you have a blend of strategic wholesale combined with D2C, the challenge there is there's two probably big challenges that I see that technology like yours probably helps with, is that when you're in the B2B world, you're selling cartons, pallets, and containers. You're not selling a single set of eyeglass frames. And the challenge there is that usually in the B2B world, you also have, especially in fashion and replenishment models with seasonality, etc., you have indent ordering as well, which is reordering mid-season or mid-run, where they now need a replenishment because now they know what their demand is like for that specific SKU, and they're going, okay, wow, this SKU has popped off way more than we perhaps expected or planned, and so now we want to reorder mid-run, mid-season, mid-delivery, whatever it might be, and say, look, we want to boost our orders by 300% now. And all of a sudden, the manufacturer, and in your case, for example, now has to go back to their contract manufacturers or their factories or whatever it might be, whether it's owned or contract, and say, look, could you tack on another 50% or another 100% or another 300% to this manufacturing run? And this starts to get pretty crazy pretty fast, especially when we're talking replenishment.
Yeah, definitely. And the reality today is that most brands, they have a big mix of different channels, right? Most brands sell directly to consumers, but they also have all the other traditional channels, such as B2B and their own brand stores, and perhaps some
marketplaces and
drop shipping. And it's super complex. And Excel is a fantastic tool, but perhaps not really built for this type of process, I guess. And even if you would be, we work a lot with fashion companies, and even if you would be 100% B2B company as a brand today, then most of the multi-brand retailers, they're they don't want to take that much risk anymore. So they don't want to place the big pre-orders that they used to do 10, 15, 20 years ago. So they just want to order like a smaller volume pre-order, and then they want to do it in season instead. So meaning that even if you are in wholesale today, the risk has been
Moved
more
to you.
pushed. Yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting world, but we're here to help, basically.
And because you've been doing this for nearly 5 years now with Madden, when you looked out across the industry and you said, look, we don't really see anything out there, because if I log into the Shopify App Store today, there's probably 20 quasi inventory demand planning apps that you can plug into your Shopify store. There's probably the more famous ones, Inventory Planner, which was originally bought by Brightpearl, and then was Brightpearl itself was acquired by Sage. So Inventory Planner seems to keep moving up the stack now to where it's a standalone product sitting directly under Sage. We have platforms like Predico and some other standalone platforms. And then, of course, we've got all of your standard OMS, IMS, WMS platforms, and some of them have their own demand planning modules that plug into them. And then we have the big ERPs, which usually have their own modules. So when you looked out across the industry, was there anything that gave you pause for a moment to say, is this a problem that really hasn't been solved yet, or maybe just hasn't been solved in the way that I think it should be solved? So what gave you the idea that, hey, despite the fact that there are other platforms out there that say they do this thing, I'm not really happy with any of those, and I think I can build a better mousetrap, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely. First off, as you mentioned, with a lot of different familiar competitor names, we're absolutely not alone in this space. And there are things happening with new companies, new tools popping up each and every month. But what I think is our main niche or main unique selling point is that we're not working with all types of consumer goods, or to be honest, you could actually use Madden Analytics for basically any type of consumer goods. But what we're focusing on, and the type of ideal customer for us, is someone in either fashion, sports, or lifestyle. And we believe those categories, perhaps especially fashion and sports, those are the most interesting to help, because they have the most problems. Because if you sell any type of clothes, for example, like within fashion or sports, you often have a lot of seasonality. So there are some specific periods during the year that some goods will sell more and less in other periods. You have fairly long lead times. You often have minimum order quantities that you need to handle in one way or another. You have problems with sizes for all your products. So you might have a product that is then divided into colors, and each color is divided into 7 or 10 different sizes. And as mentioned earlier, you often have this channel mix. You're not only selling online or only in your brand stores. You have this huge mix of different channels and different types of customers. And these different factors makes this, like the fashion industry, it's a more complex problem to solve than if you're selling, I don't know, something easier, nuts and bolts, like things that have a more stable demand. You can probably get in-season deliveries the next day from a lot of suppliers. You don't have this long forecast window of maybe 9 months. So that's why we focus on fashion, sports, and lifestyle, because we believe it's a bigger problem. And basically our whole platform is built around those industries, or those verticals. So I think a lot of the other competitors out there, I don't want to say anything negative about them, because I think a lot of them are doing great businesses and help their customers a lot. But from what we've seen, it's more like an online Excel version on steroids. Like, you have this today, what does that mean for tomorrow? You have to order this much in order to not run out of stock, etc. While we've built Madden with fashion in mind. Our forecast windows are really long. All our forecast algorithms they're focused on typical behavior within fashion, with product life cycles, etc. And we solved the typical problems such as size curves, lead times, minimum order quantities. Yeah, basically the fashion-specific problems that are apparent in the industry.
Yeah, I guess if you're Wilson or whatever, and you make baseball gloves or basketballs or bats or something like this, the reality is that your what we consider catalog churn or SKU churn is very low. Some of these products and some of these SKUs are market for decades at a time, well, certainly years at a time. And as a result of that, I guess if you don't have massive turnover and you don't have massive seasonality, of course, baseball has a season. And so there is some seasonality there, but people are playing their given sport year round usually. And they might go from indoors to outdoors to batting cages, etc., for example, in the case of baseball, but there's relatively consistent demand with some spikes, maybe Christmas or birthdays or things like that. But to your point, I think fashion in particular, home, lifestyle, anything that has either an element of seasonality to it or it has an aesthetic element to it that comes and goes in terms of in and out of fashion, in and out of the cultural zeitgeist. Certain products will pop off at certain times because maybe an influencer is seen wearing it or seen using it or seen in a photo of their home and they've got this special pillow or they've got whatever it might be. We have these massive variations in demand in these certain industries, especially for products that have an aesthetic element to them. It might even be furniture or home decor or things like that have a really high turnover rate of the SKUs in the catalog throughout the year. And all these industries are having massive challenges with disruptions to supply chain in particular, which exacerbates the already existing challenges of the fickle nature of consumers and saying, what I liked last month, I'm maybe not going to like next month. And I've got to try to adapt to that. And I've got to try to keep up with changing consumer tastes over time. And is one of the things that you help solve for the radically shifting sands of global supply chains, not just because of COVID, because COVID threw global supply chains in an absolute disarray, but it also threw demand into disarray as well. But now that things have come back to some more semblance of normality, supply chains are still challenging. We have changing markets, we have changing tariff models, we have changing everything in the global supply chain. That means that these brands are having to not only cope with changing demand curves, but changing supply curves and raw materials sourcing. All these things come into play when you're trying to do proper demand planning, right?
Yeah, definitely. And we have a lot of different functions, for example, to always calculate with some kind of safety stock or safety margin when you order, because you never know what's going to happen, right? Is the Suez Canal going to be blocked again next year or whatever? We try to help the brands to actually always have this kind of safety stock in place. But I think globalization and digitization has really, to your point, it has really made trends go faster, right? Because just as you described, like for 1 week, one type of product might be super hot, but then 3 weeks after, there's a completely new product because some influencer in another country who is super popular did some kind of push for it. And I think this calls for always being on top of your data, much if you're relaxed and try to quantify your volumes just by sticking a finger in the air and doing a best guesstimate, that won't work when things are moving so fast as they are today. And also, I think it's super interesting what you said about, for example, Wilson selling probably a lot of never out of stock products or carryovers or whatever you want to call them. This is actually something that is, from what we see, it's increasingly popular within the fashion industry as well. And this is not rocket science, but everyone wants to sell products that have a long lifetime.
Evergreen products, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. It's much better for your business, and it's also much better for the environment, obviously, since you don't have to take these huge bets on seasonal collections. And this is something that is really showing in the fashion industry as well, that people want to move to a more permanent collection. But on the other hand, a fashion brand is a brand. They live by their reputation and their sort of newness and everything. So they have to always have collections as well, seasonal collections, and they have to launch new products, new styles, etc. And then through our platform, we can help them. It's not a black box reporting tool saying that you insert some input numbers and then we give you a locked recommendation like this is going to sell this much. It's more of a tool that is used by the production and design department. So, for example, if you want to launch 30 new styles one season or one collection, then we have some really cool features to learn our algorithms what these products, how they will perform, basically. And that's in the hands of
prediction algorithm.
Yeah, it's a
prediction.
Some
forward modeling.
Exactly. So you guide the module saying that the design department believes that this new shirt is going to have a similar sales pattern as these different products that they've had before. So we can actually reuse historical data for other existing products and apply them on new products as well. And I think this is how many brands wants to operate, because they don't want fashion is very much a business of betting on the right trends, the right colors, right materials, etc. They don't want to have a system that just you insert, this is a red shirt, and then you get a recommendation on how much that will sell. They want to be in control of how much do we actually want to bet on this new shirt. Are we going to activate it somehow? Or are we going to spend a lot of marketing money on it? Are we going to gift it to a lot of influencers, etc.? They want to be in control of the data, which that's basically how we built the whole platform. We give recommendations, but you're always in control of the forecast. You can always tweak, increase, decrease, insert your own assumptions. And I think this is also interesting in terms of the AI revolution that is ongoing at the moment, because probably a lot of different processes and different tools will be replaced by new AI tools that perhaps we haven't even seen yet. But I think when it comes to fashion buying, there needs to be a human element to it. You can't just rely on a model saying how much you're going to sell and how much you need to produce. You still want to be in control of all the numbers, all the forecasts, and be able to tweak those, which is, that's basically how we built the platform.
And how are you seeing your customers deal with, on the one hand, wanting to move to more permanent collections in their ranges because of all the things we just discussed, but then having the rise of the Sheins of the world, the H&Ms of the world? I think H&M famously says that they're getting feedback back to their factories within weekly feedback from the sales floor directly to their factories of boosting production up, decreasing production for the styles that aren't selling well. They're getting feedback not only from the salespeople on the store floor, but through their point of sale system, directly back into their ERP, directly back into demand planning, right down to the factory floor level, and being able to flex up and down. So we've got, on the one extreme end of the spectrum, we've got ultra fast fashion. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the totally sustainable brands, which like to have like 90% of their catalog being this evergreen product that maybe they just tinker around the edges with. And maybe I'm thinking of Allbirds and some other brands that have the mainstay of their product range, and then they only have a few SKUs that change seasonally or throughout the year or from year to year. And it feels like most fashion brands fall somewhere in the middle. They don't have total evergreen products, or they're not like 90% evergreen, but they never want to get into a situation where they're even within the realms of competing with a Shein or an H&M or some of those other ultra fast fashion brands. It feels like they're a little bit between a rock and a hard place, right? They have to figure out a way to differentiate that is sustainable, not only environmentally, but just as a business. How are we sustainable? How are we not going to tie up huge sums of cash in having massive catalog churn and massive new design? Because it takes a lot of time and energy for these brands to do the design work required to get from an initial design and tech pack into a factory floor's hands, get the sampling done, and then getting it actually into mass production. This is a massively heavy lift for these brands. So it's like, it feels like they're walking a little bit of a high wire. And how are you seeing the brands that you work cope with the challenges of the spectrum?
Yeah, yes, that's a $1 million question, right? How to compete with Shein and the likes. It's a big discussion in Sweden at the moment because they're popular, right? The Chinese big players, they're popular, and they're gaining market share, obviously, from a lot of more traditional players. While at the same time, the discussion is around, is this really sustainable? Is it okay for the environment to ship a lot of products in packs of one from China to Europe, etc.? It's a big discussion, and I think I don't have I wish I had the answer, but I guess all brands that wants to compete with these big, super fast fashion players, they need to really differentiate by, I would say, by brand and quality. And quality doesn't have to mean premium quality, but it could mean good quality for the price point that you're selling. We have one customer, it's a Swedish customer called Asket. They're basically an evergreen fashion company. They only have a permanent collection, and their sort of motto, or whatever they call it, is that buy less but with more quality. Their sort of vision is that if you have a wardrobe from them, then you have to buy less goods, basically. So perhaps from a business perspective, people might say that we want to sell as much as possible and as high volumes as possible, but they've actually gone the other route, saying that they want to sell as little as possible to as many customers as possible. And I think that's a super interesting business model. They're doing really well from a Swedish Nordic perspective. We have other customers that are more fast fashion, but they're obviously not on the scale, like similar scale as Shein or the other Chinese players. I've seen one really good example of a brand that is constantly testing new products. So they have production fairly close to where the company is located, and they have a team of a few persons working the same geographical area as the production, and they can really be on top of the production, having really short lead times because they can handle any issues immediately instead of emailing back and forth or setting up calls. And then they always produce with the lowest quantity for each batch. And they launch all the new styles. Every week they have a set of new styles, and then they test them. And if they work, then they put them into more permanent production. If they don't work, they just try to sell through as quickly as possible. It doesn't have to be super quick. They can still live in the collection for a few months. But I think that's a really good way to test different styles in a sort of not fast fashion way, but similar business concept. But that requires that you have short lead times and also low quantities, obviously.
Yeah, and then I see some other brands, famously like the Supremes of the world and a few other brands, where they've gone almost the extreme other direction, which is to say we're going to have very limited production runs of all of our products. It's going to be in high demand. Basically, we're always going to have less product than the demand is, and that's going to create FOMO. That's going to create this sense of, hey, I want to get it now because I know that in a month this product is likely to never be available again. They're going to produce 500 of this shirt or whatever it is, and that's it. It's going to be a limited production run, and I always know that if I want to get this hot new thing from this brand, then I've got to jump on the bandwagon as fast as possible, because this is just not they're the opposite of the permanent collection model, which is to say we're not fast fashion, meaning we're not going to release 1,000 designs a week, but we're maybe going to be slower fashion. We're going to have limited releases, limited quantities, but we're going to be very intentional about the products we do release and make sure that they hopefully will resonate really strongly with our audience. We're going to tailor products really closely for them, but it's basically going to be like limited edition. Almost every product is going to be a limited edition product, and get in now or miss out.
Exactly. And the problem is that there can only be, there can't be too many Supremes, right? Because then they wouldn't be Supreme, right? So
yes.
I guess all brands would love if they could have the same type of branding and customer loyalty as Supreme, but that's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, absolutely. And one final thing I think that I'll have to ask you about is, what do you think about brands and retail theater? Because what we learned after COVID, and it smacked us all upside the head, it wasn't incredibly surprising to me, but I think it was pretty surprising to many in the industry, just how fast physical retail would bounce back, right? And those of us that work purely in the e-commerce and digital space, we like to think that e-commerce and digital is the savior of retail. But the reality is still, to this day, 70 to 80% of all retail dollars are spent in physical stores. That is the reality. And sure, e-commerce is still up and to the right, but certainly it's much more back to the mean trend as it was pre-COVID. And the reality is e-commerce growth as a percentage of total retail is actually slowing down. But what we see is that retail growth is just as strong as it ever was. It's just as popular as it ever was. And most brands must have a omnichannel strategy. They need to be everywhere their potential customers are. Physical retail, D2C website, marketplaces, social. They have to be everywhere. And they have to be almost omnipresent to be able to get their brand to the four corners of the earth. Plus, they have to have strategic wholesale for the retailers that are operating in markets that they don't operate in or would never be able to get into or access. And so this to me seems like not only a massive opportunity, but it also creates additional challenges for supply chains and demand planning, because now we have channel proliferation unlike we've ever seen before in the history of the world. And how does Madden uniquely handle this crazy world of omnichannel and help brands do better and be better and understand demand by channel?
Yeah. So obviously we help out with the channel strategy from logistics or demand perspectives. A lot of our, if we look at the D2C brands that we have as customers, a lot of them already have brand stores. And I know a lot of them are researching to potentially open up their first one or expanding the brand store network. Like the store, like the retail store industry has gone from a lot of multi-brand stores to now being much more brand stores instead.
D2C stores.
Yeah, exactly. D2C stores, which is nice as a consumer, because they're often, if you have a brand store and you're this credible and nice brand, then your brand store is basically it's an excellent way to showcase your brand, right? So they're often really nice, and
they carry the full range for a start off, whereas in multi-brand stores, they cherry pick the SKUs that they will carry. And so therefore you can't be sure that if you walk into just a standard aggregator retailer, you can't be sure that you're going to be able to get every product from this brand.
Exactly. And multi-brand stores, I think my personal belief is that in order for them to thrive, they really have to have some kind of crisp and clear reason to exist. And that must be either like a very curated assortment that they carry, or it could be like more of a Zalando type. They always have really good prices compared to everyone else, and super fast shipping and things like that. But obviously, multi-brand retail that's a tough industry at the moment, unless you are super focused on something specific that makes your sort of reason to exist and to be strong. But obviously, we help out with, for example, if you have a store if you are a brand and you have a store network, then we help out with calculating exactly what the demand most likely will be in each and every store down on SKU level. It requires that we have a sufficient amount of data per store. So it needs to be a store that has some volume in order for the algorithms to work. But then we can help out with, both analyzing current inventory in the store, which product needs to be activated, which needs to be replenished as soon as possible. But we can also set up this for goods from central warehouse to your stores, but also between stores, because one item might be super popular in one store, but it might be much less popular in another store, depending on geography and trends, etc. Sometimes it makes sense to actually move goods between stores. And I think physical stores it's really interesting for a lot of brands. The eyewear brand that I used to run, we had the 6 physical stores, and they were all performing really well. Now, eyewear it's a special business because you have to do eye exams, so we had opticians and stuff like that. But it was just such a good way to meet the customers and to build the brand and focus on interior design in the stores and make sure it looks super crisp and good. And they all actually most of them performed really well. Healthy EBITDA margins and good cash flow and so on. And I think that's also the case for a lot of D2C brands that we have as customers. If they have a few brand stores of their own in good locations with good staff and spend some resources on what the store actually looks like, they can perform really well and actually add to the potential success of the company.
Yeah, makes sense. So how do you guys make your money? You're a SaaS platform, and I'm guessing that you need to integrate with systems like ERPs, WMSs, e-commerce websites, point of sale systems, or ideally, if everything ends up back in the ERP, then maybe you only have to do one integration with the ERP or whatever it is. But first of all, what systems do you typically find yourself integrating with? And then how do you guys make your money? Do you just charge a monthly fee? Do you charge an endpoint level fee? How do you guys make your money?
Yeah, we charge a monthly license fee, and the size of that fee depends on a few factors. The biggest factor is how much data do we need to process within Madden. The larger the company, the more transactions, the more inventory, the higher the price, basically. It's still, though, much better prices than the big enterprise solutions. So it's a classic SaaS monthly fee. Sorry, what was the other part of the question?
Just which systems do you typically find yourself needing to integrate with?
So we see a lot of different Shopify customers. We see a lot of, a few different ERP systems here in Sweden and in the Nordics. Microsoft Business Central is super popular as ERP systems. We have actually a few different integrations towards Business Central together with some partners. We have a lot of different WMS systems that we're integrated to. Could also be PLM systems. Yeah, the larger the customer, the more likely they are to have a full ERP system, which is great when they do, because that makes our lives easier. We know that all the data is in place. We can get it somehow through an API or some kind of integration. But for the smaller companies, it's not unusual that we have a lot of customers, for example, using Shopify as their e-com platform. They don't have an ERP system. They might be using some kind of
QuickBooks or Xero or some kind of just regular standard accounting package in the back end, but it's not an ERP.
Yeah, exactly. So we might have to pull some data from the accounting system. We might have to pull some data from the WMS system. So there's usually some kind of patchwork of finding the right data setup, but we do have integration towards the largest systems that we come across. For the customer or the user, it's actually super easy to get started. We handle the integrations, make sure that all data is fed smoothly, and they can focus on starting to quantify their sales and their volumes going forward.
Amazing. And AI, final sort of question on this line, AI, what is next for you guys? If you were to look out 12 to 18 months, what kind of functionality don't you have today that you'd love to have in the platform? Or is there anything that your customers are asking for that you don't yet do that you say, hey, look, in 12 months, we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z that we don't do today? And finally, how is AI impacting that roadmap? Because it seems, I would assume, and I don't play in your space, so this is purely assumption, but I would assume that AI is going to be able to help with predictive analytics, perhaps more than in any other way, because if with machine vision, for example, and then AI back in the back end of that, crunching the numbers, if I look at with machine vision, if I look at two designs, one that's a historical design that I've been selling for 2 years, and then I've got a new design, the AI knows, okay, cool. They both have a V-neck, they've got a similar design, they've got similar colors, or even if we just looked at the structured data attributes of each of these products, I can probably get to a point where I say, okay, here's how these products with these attributes have performed historically. So if this new product has 80% of those same attributes or 70% of those same attributes, we can probably be reasonably confident in how well this product is going to perform. And it feels like AI is transforming kind of all software, but particularly for software like yours, that feels like a big unlock for lots of big data crunching. And in fact, being able to connect dots that humans wouldn't normally connect as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we use a lot of machine learning already as of today when it comes to the forecast and analyzing the historical data, which is used as input for the future forecasts, obviously. And that's definitely something that we spend a lot of resources on it in the team today to tweak and enhance and make good progress. But I think that's where things will definitely happen when it comes to AI in our space to basically make better forecasts. You had a good example of analyzing different styles and historical styles with suggestions for new styles. I'm not saying we're going to launch that or build that, but who knows? There's so much going on at the moment, and I think from an algorithmic forecast perspective, there's so much to do when it comes to AI. Yeah, it's probably going to happen a lot from our side.
Makes sense. And now as we come down to the end of our time together, I really appreciate your time. An hour has absolutely flown by. Now's where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. So, Mr. Axel BUKOWSKI, what is your question for me today?
If you would start a D2C brand as of today, which category do you think is the most, where would you focus? Which product category do you think is the most interesting one?
Very good question. I think for me, the bigger question is that I would be asking, specifically because I now work so heavily in the B2B space, I would probably be asking myself, what has the biggest strategic wholesale opportunity in addition to D2C? Because I would never as of today, I would never launch a pure D2C brand. It would have to be both, because D2C are manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors selling to end consumers. In the B2B world, it's manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors selling to business customers. So they are tightly aligned in the way that they operate from a back office perspective and who the fundamental business founders tend to be. And so for me, I would always be looking at, just to de-risk the D2C side of my business, I would need to have some very strong strategic go-to-market wholesale opportunities before I would even consider establishing a new D2C brand. So I would probably be looking at categories that already have some strong retail aggregators that are already operating in markets that I know I would have very little chance of being able to penetrate on my own. So that I don't necessarily have a fascination with any specific category or vertical of product. In my personal life, there's certain things that I like that I probably wouldn't want to do them as a business because it would probably kill my passion for the product. And I find that often happens when people start doing something they love as a passion project and then they turn it into a business and it's okay, now I really have to treat this as a business as opposed to purely a hobby or an interest. But yeah, I think my main consideration would be, is there a strong existing wholesale market for this category? And if not, I would run a mile, because I think that brands nowadays, most D2C brands, and we see it with the major D2C darlings during COVID that exploded during COVID, and even Nike, vaunted Nike themselves have been very honest about the fact over the last couple of months that their D2C strategy has not worked out in the way that they had expected, to the degree that they had expected, and they're reopening some of these strategic wholesale accounts that they had killed off. They now need to be in more retail shops, and they know that. And so they are re-embracing wholesale like they've never done before. And they've brought in a new CEO to help rebuild those wholesale strategic wholesale relationships. And Dono's out, and now we've got a new guy in there that's focused on two things. And they've said, we're focused on product innovation and we're focused on wholesale. And those are the two big focuses for the foreseeable for them. And so I think if Nike's got to be strategic in how they go to market as a strong D2C brand, then man, if you're starting up a brand new D2C brand, you better have some strong wholesale opportunities associated with that product. Otherwise, you're probably going to struggle.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there are so many benefits to wholesale, apart from what we spoke about initially regarding forecasting and quantifying volumes. I mean, just as a marketing channel and volume channel, wholesale can be just fantastic. I'd rather sell a container of 10,000 pieces to one wholesale account instead of chasing that
10,000 customers.
Exactly, because that's going to be expensive to acquire those 10,000 customers.
Not only that, but I think most D2C brands forget that having strategic wholesale accounts not only gets you into customers' hands that you couldn't access otherwise, but it also dramatically improves your unit economics on your D2C sales too. Because if you can explode your volumes, then your unit cost comes down. So everything you make in the D2C world with like exploding CAC costs and marketing costs and everything else, customer acquisition costs and retention costs, the cost, what I find is that oftentimes that net margin for the customers I'm working with. So I have a lot of D2C brands come to me and say, look, we don't know how to go about establishing a wholesale channel, a e-commerce or a digital wholesale channel. We don't know how to do EDI. We don't know how to do punch out. We don't know how to do self-service e-commerce for wholesale. Can you help us? What we find is when we do the homework on it, we find that the net margins oftentimes end up being very similar between their D2C sales and their wholesale sales. Yes, your gross margins on wholesale are lower, but when you take into account the cost to serve in each of those two channels and the cost of customer acquisition in each of those two channels, the AOVs obviously in wholesale much higher, CLV much higher, long-term sticky relationships that are going to be buying over and over again. And so what we find is that the net margins oftentimes end up being very similar between those two channels.
Fascinating.
Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. If people want to get a hold of you, I will drop a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, as well as a link to the Madden Analytics website. Other than that, how do you like people to get a hold of you if they want to talk all things e-commerce, digital, retail, wholesale, demand planning, all these wonderful things that you're an expert in? How do they get a hold of you?
I think LinkedIn is really good. Axel BUKOWSKI, or email axel@maddenanalytics.com.
Amazing. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a really fascinating conversation. You're doing some good work, and I always wish people all the best that are trying to help collectively our industry get better, because as there's more trust in our industry, it only helps us all. I believe a rising tide floats all boats. So congratulations, and I hope that you will continue to do very well with Madden Analytics.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Super fun to participate.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.